A frog is any member of a diverse and largely carnivorous group of short-bodied, tailless amphibians composing the order Anura, one coming from the ancient Greek nu omicron wiro alpha, literally without tail. The oldest fossil proto-frog Triadobatrachus is known from the Early Triassic of Madagascar 250 million years ago. But molecular clock dating suggests their split from other amphibians may extend further back to the Permian, 265 million years ago. Frogs are widely distributed, ranging from the tropics to subarctic regions, but the greatest concentration of species diversity is in tropical rainforest. Frogs account for around 88% of extant amphibian species. They are also one of the 5 most diverse vertebrate orders. Warty frog species tend to be called toads, but the distinction between frogs and toads is informal, not from taxonomy or evolutionary history. An adult frog has a stout body, protruding eyes, anteriorly attached tongue, limbs folded underneath, and no tail. The tail of tailed frogs is an extension of the male cloaker. Frogs have glandular skin, with secretions ranging from distasteful to toxic. Their skin varies in color from well-camouflaged, dappled brown, gray, and green to vivid patterns of bright red or yellow and black to show toxicity and ward off predators. Adult frogs live in fresh water and on dry land. Some species are adapted for living underground or in trees. Frogs typically lay their eggs in the water. The eggs hatch into aquatic larvae called tadpoles that have tails and internal gills. They have highly specialized rasping mouthparts suitable for herbivorous, omnivorous, or planktivorous diets. The life cycle is completed when they metamorphose into adults. A few species deposit eggs on land or bypass the tadpole stage. Adult frogs generally have a carnivorous diet consisting of small invertebrates, but omnivorous species exist and a few feed on plant matter. Frog skin has a rich microbiome, which is important to their health. Frogs are extremely efficient at converting what they eat into body mass. They are an important food source for predators and part of the food web dynamics of many of the world's ecosystems. The skin is semi-permeable, making them susceptible to dehydration, so they either live in moist places or have special adaptations to deal with dry habitats. Frogs produce a wide range of vocalizations, particularly in their breeding season, and exhibit many different kinds of complex behaviors to attract mates, to fend off predators, and to generally survive. Frogs are valued as food by humans and also have many cultural roles in literature, symbolism, and religion. They are also seen as environmental bellwethers, with declines in frog populations often viewed as early warning signs of environmental damage. Frog populations have declined significantly since the 1950s. More than 1/3 of species are considered to be threatened with extinction, and over 120 are believed to have become extinct since the 1980s. The number of malformations among frogs is on the rise, and an emerging fungal disease, chytridiomyces, has spread around the world. Conservation biologists are working to understand the causes of these problems and to resolve them. The use of the common names frog and toad has no taxonomic justification. From a classification perspective, all members of the order Anura are frogs, but only members of the family Buphonidae are considered true toads. The use of the term frog in common names usually refers to species that are aquatic or semi-aquatic and have smooth, moist skins. The term toad generally refers to species that are terrestrial with dry, warty skins. To 3. There are numerous exceptions to this rule. The European firebelly toad Bombina has a slightly warty skin and prefers a watery habitat, whereas the Panamanian golden frog Atelopus sedeki is in the toad family Buphonidae and has a smooth skin. Etymology. The origin of the order name Anura, its original spelling Anurs, is the ancient Greek alpha privative prefix nu, and from before a vowel without 6 and omicron rho yr animal tail, 7 meaning tailless. It refers to the tailless character of these amphibians. The origins of the word frog are uncertain and debated. 11. The word is first attested in Old English as froga, but the usual Old English word for the frog was frosk, with variants such as frox and forsk, and it is agreed that the word frog is somehow related to this. Old English frosk remained in dialectal use in English as frosh and frosk into the 19th century, 12, and is paralleled widely in other Germanic languages, with examples in the modern languages including German frosch, Norwegian frosk, Icelandic frosker, and Dutch kickvors. 11. These words allow reconstruction of a common Germanic ancestor *froskas. 13. The third edition of the Oxford English Dictionary finds that the etymology of *froskas is uncertain, but agrees with arguments that it could plausibly derive from a Proto-Indo-European base along the lines of *preu, meaning jump. How Old English frosk gave rise to froga is, however, uncertain, as the development does not involve a regular sound change. Instead, it seems that there was a trend in Old English to coin nicknames for animals ending in g, with examples themselves all of uncertain etymology including dog, hog, pig, stag, and earwig. Frog appears to have been adapted from frosk as part of this trend. Meanwhile, the word toad, first attested as Old English tbeach, is unique to English and is likewise of uncertain etymology. 14. It is the basis for the word tadpole, first attested as Middle English tadpole, apparently meaning toad head. Taxonomy: about 88% of amphibian species are classified in the order Anura. 16. These include over 7,700 species, 1 in 59 families, of which the Hylidae 1062 spp, Strabomantidae 807 spp, Microhylidae 758 sp, and Buphonidae 657 spp are the richest in species. Dark-colored toad facing left, European fire-bellied toad Bombina bombina. The Anura include all modern frogs and any fossil species that fit within the Anuran definition. The characteristics of Anuran adults include 9 or fewer presacral vertebrae, the presence of a urostyle-formed effused vertebrae, no tail, a long and forward-sloping ilium, shorter for limbs than hind limbs, radius and ulna fused, tibia and fibula fused, elongated ankle bones, absence of a prefrontal bone, presence of a hyoid plate, a lower jaw without teeth with the exception of gastrotheca consisting of 3 pairs of bones angulosplenial, dentary, and mentamecalian, with the last pair being absent in Pipoidea. 18. An unsupported tongue, limb spaces underneath the skin, and a muscle, the protractor lentis, attached to the lens of the eye. 19. The Anuran larva or tadpole has a single central respiratory spiracle and mouthparts consisting of keratinous beaks and denticles. Panamanian golden frog, Atelopus zedeки. Frogs and toads are broadly classified into 3 suborders. Archaeobatrachia, which includes 4 families of primitive frogs. Mesobatrachia, which includes 5 families of more evolutionary intermediate frogs. And Neobatrachia, by far the largest group, which contains the remaining families of modern frogs, including most common species throughout the world. The suborder Neobatrachia is further divided into the 2 superfamilies Hyloidea and Ranoidea. 20. This classification is based on such morphological features as the number of vertebrae, the structure of the pectoral girdle, and the morphology of tadpoles. While this classification is largely accepted, relationships among families of frogs are still debated. Some species of anurans hybridize readily. For instance, the edible frog Pelophylax esculentus is a hybrid between the pool frog P. lessonae and the marsh frog P. ridibundus. 22. The fire-bellied toads Bombina bombina and B. variegata are similar in forming hybrids. These are less fertile than their parents, giving rise to a hybrid zone where the hybrids are prevalent. The origins and evolutionary relationships between the 3 main groups of amphibians are hotly debated. A molecular phylogeny based on rDNA analysis dating from 2005 suggests that salamanders and caecilians are more closely related to each other than they are to frogs, and the divergence of the three groups took place in the Paleozoic, or early Mesozoic, before the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea, and soon after their divergence from the lobe-finned fishes. This would help account for the relative scarcity of amphibian fossils from the period before the groups split. 24. Another molecular phylogenetic analysis conducted about the same time concluded that lissamphibians first appeared about 330 million years ago, and that the temnospondyl origin hypothesis is more credible than other theories. The neobatrachians seem to have originated in Africa, India, the salamanders in East Asia, and the caecilians in tropical Pangaea. 25. Other researchers, while agreeing with the main thrust of this study, questioned the choice of calibration points used to synchronize the data. They proposed that the date of lissamphibian diversification should be placed in the Permian, rather less than 300 million years ago, a date in better agreement with the paleontological data. A further study in 2011 using both extinct and living taxa sampled for morphological, as well as molecular data, came to the conclusion that Lissamphibia is monophyletic and that it should be nested within Lepispondyle rather than within Temnospondylae. The study postulated that Lissamphibia originated no earlier than the late Carboniferous, some 290 to 305 million years ago. The split between Anura and Chordata was estimated as taking place 290 million years ago, rather later than most molecular studies suggest, with the caecilians splitting off 239 million years ago. A fossilized frog from the Czech Republic, possibly Triadobatrachus gigas. In 2008, Triadobatrachus houtoni, a temnospondyl with many frog and salamander-like characteristics, was discovered in Texas. It dated back 290 million years and was hailed as a missing link, a stembatrachian close to the common ancestor of frogs and salamanders. Consistent with the widely accepted hypothesis that frogs and salamanders are more closely related to each other forming a clade called Batrachia than they are to caecilians. 28-29. However, others have suggested that Triadobatrachus houtoni was only a disaurophoid temnospondyl unrelated to extant amphibians. Salientia latincellaris salio, to jump, is the name of the total group that includes modern frogs in the order Anura as well as their close fossil relatives, the proto-frogs or stem frogs. The common features possessed by these proto-frogs include 14 presacral vertebrae. Modern frogs have 8 or 9, a long and forward-sloping ilium in the pelvis, the presence of a frontoparietal bone, and a lower jaw without teeth. The earliest known amphibians that were more closely related to frogs than to salamanders are Triadobatrachus macynoti. From the early Triassic period of Madagascar about 250 million years ago, and Chaetobatrachus polonicus, from the early Triassic of Poland about the same age as Triadobatrachus. The skull of Triadobatrachus is frog-like, being broad with large eye sockets, but the fossil has features diverging from modern frogs. These include a longer body with more vertebrae. The tail has separate vertebrae, unlike the fused urostyle or coccyx in modern frogs. The tibia and fibula bones are also separate, making it probable that Triadobatrachus was not an efficient leaper. 31. A 2019 study has noted the presence of salientia from the Chinal Formation and suggested that anurans might have first appeared during the late Triassic. On the basis of fossil evidence, the earliest known true frogs that fall into the anuran lineage proper all lived in the early Jurassic period. One such early frog species, Procellaris bitis, was discovered in 1995 in the Cayenta Formation of Arizona and dates back to the early Jurassic epoch 199.6 to 175 million years ago, making Procellaris somewhat more recent than Triadobatrachus. 34. Like the latter, Procellaris did not have greatly enlarged legs, but had the typical three-pronged pelvic structure of modern frogs. Unlike Triadobatrachus, Procellaris had already lost nearly all of its tail and was well adapted for jumping. Another early Jurassic frog is Viruela herbsti, which is known only from dorsal and ventral impressions of a single animal and was estimated to be 33 millimeters, 1 + 1 for in from snout to vent. Triadobatrachus digestoi from the Middle Jurassic is slightly younger, about 155 to 170 million years old. The main evolutionary changes in this species involve the shortening of the body and the loss of the tail. Tadpoles of N. digestoi constitute the oldest tadpoles found as of 2024, dating back to 168 to 161 million years ago. These tadpoles also showed adaptations for filter feeding, implying residence in temporary pools by filter-feeding larvae was already commonplace. The evolution of modern Anura likely was complete by the Jurassic period. Since then, evolutionary changes in chromosome numbers have taken place about 20 times faster in mammals than in frogs, which means speciation is occurring more rapidly in mammals. According to genetic studies, the families Hyloidea, Microhylidae, and the clade Anura comprising about 88% of living frogs diversified simultaneously some 66 million years ago. Soon after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event associated with the Chicxulub impactor. All origins of arboreality, for example in Hyloidea and Anura, follow from that time and the resurgence of forest that occurred afterwards. Frog fossils have been found on all of the Earth's continents. In 2020, it was announced that 40-million-year-old helmeted frog fossils had been discovered by a team of vertebrate paleontologists in Seymour Island on the Antarctic Peninsula, indicating that this region was once home to frogs related to those now living in South American phylogeny. A cladogram showing the relationships of the different families of frogs in the clade Anura can be seen in the table below. This diagram, in the form of a tree, shows how each frog family is related to other families, with each node representing a point of common ancestry. It is based on Frost et al. 2006, 40 for Heineck et al. 2009, 45 and Pyron and Veens 2011. A bullfrog skeleton showing elongated limb bones and extra joints. Red marks indicate bones which have been substantially elongated in frogs and joints which have become mobile. Blue indicates joints and bones which have not been modified or only somewhat elongated. Frogs have no tail except as larvae, and most have long hind legs, elongated ankle bones, webbed toes, no claws, large eyes, and a smooth or warty skin. They have short vertebral columns, with no more than 10 free vertebrae and fused tailbones urostyle or coccyx. 47 frogs range in size from Pediphrine amauensis of Papua New Guinea, that is 7.7 millimeters, 0.30 in snout vent length 48 to the up to about 35 centimeters, 14 in and 3.3 kilograms, 7.3 pounds. Goliath frog Conroe, a Goliath of Central Africa. 49. There are prehistoric, extinct species that reached even larger sizes, feet and legs. The structure of the feet and legs varies greatly among frog species, depending in part on whether they live primarily on the ground, in water, in trees, or in burrows. Adult anurans have 4 fingers on the hands and 5 toes on the feet. 51, but the smallest species often have hands and feet, where some of the digits are vestigial. 52 frogs must be able to move quickly through their environment to catch prey and escape predators, and numerous adaptations help them to do so. Most frogs are either proficient at jumping or are descended from ancestors that were, with much of the musculoskeletal morphology modified for this purpose. The tibia, fibula, and tarsals have been fused into a single strong bone, as have the radius and ulna in the forelimbs, which must absorb the impact on landing. The metatarsals have become elongated to add to the leg length and allow frogs to push against the ground for a longer period on takeoff. The ilium has elongated and formed a mobile joint with the sacrum which, in specialist jumpers, such as rhinids and hylids, functions as an additional limb joint to further power the leaps. The tail vertebrae have fused into a urostyle, which is retracted inside the pelvis. This enables the force to be transferred from the legs to the body during a leap. Webbed hind foot of common frog, tailless tree frog Latoria tyleri has large toe pads and webbed feet. The muscular system has been similarly modified. The hind limbs of ancestral frogs presumably contain pairs of muscles, which would act in opposition, one muscle to flex the knee, a different muscle to extend it, as is seen in most other limbed animals. However, in modern frogs, almost all muscles have been modified to contribute to the action of jumping, with only a few small muscles remaining to bring the limb back to the starting position and maintain posture. The muscles have also been greatly enlarged, with the main leg muscles accounting for over 17% of the total mass of frogs. Many frogs have webbed feet, and the degree of webbing is directly proportional to the amount of time the species spends in the water. 54. The completely aquatic African dwarf frog Hymenopterus sp. has fully webbed toes, whereas those of White's tree frog Latoria caerulea, an arboreal species, are only a quarter or half webbed. Exceptions include flying frogs in the Hylidae and Rhacophoridae, which also have fully webbed toes used in gliding. Arboreal frogs have pads located on the ends of their toes to help grip vertical surfaces. These are not suction pads, the surface consisting instead of columnar cells with flat tops with small gaps between them lubricated by mucus glands. When the frog applies pressure, the cells adhere to irregularities on the surface and the grip is maintained through surface tension. This allows the frog to climb on smooth surfaces, but the system does not function efficiently when the pads are excessively wet. In many arboreal frogs, a small intercalary structure on each toe increases the surface area touching the substrate. Furthermore, many arboreal frogs have hip joints that allow both hopping and walking. Some frogs that live high in trees even possess an elaborate degree of webbing between their toes. This allows the frogs to parachute or make a controlled glide from one position in the canopy to another. Ground-dwelling frogs generally lack the adaptations of aquatic and arboreal frogs. Most have smaller toe pads, if any, and little webbing. Some burrowing frogs, such as Couch's spadefoot Scaphiopus cushi, have a flap-like toe extension on the hind feet, a keratinous tubercle often referred to as a spade, that helps them to burrow. Sometimes during the tadpole, the full leg still grows, but in others it does not, although the frog may still live out its normal lifespan with only 3 limbs. Occasionally, a parasitic flatworm Riberoia ondatray digs into the rear of a tadpole, causing a rearrangement of the limb bud cells, and the frog develops 1 or more extra legs. Skin. A frog's skin is protective, has a respiratory function, can absorb water, and helps control body temperature. It has many glands, particularly on the head and back, which often exude distasteful and toxic substances, granular glands. The secretion is often sticky and helps keep the skin moist, protects against the entry of molds and bacteria, and makes the animal slippery and more able to escape from predators. 60. The skin is shed every few weeks. It usually splits down the middle of the back and across the belly, and the frog pulls its arms and legs free. The sloughed skin is then worked towards the head where it is quickly eaten. Being cold-blooded, frogs have to adopt suitable behavior patterns to regulate their temperature. To warm up, they can move into the sun or onto a warm surface. If they overheat, they can move into the shade or adopt a stance that exposes the minimum area of skin to the air. This posture is also used to prevent water loss and involves the frog squatting close to the substrate with its hands and feet tucked under its chin and body. 62. The color of a frog's skin is used for thermoregulation. In cool, damp conditions, the color will be darker than on a hot, dry day. The gray phone nest tree frog Chiromantis xerompelina is even able to turn white to minimize the chance of overheating. Many frogs are able to absorb water and oxygen directly through the skin, especially around the pelvic area, but the permeability of a frog's skin can also result in water loss. Glands located all over the body exude mucus, which helps keep the skin moist and reduces evaporation. Some glands on the hands and chest of males are specialized to produce sticky secretions to aid in amplexus. Similar glands in tree frogs produce a glue-like substance on the adhesive discs of the feet. Some arboreal frogs reduce water loss by having a waterproof layer of skin, and several South American species coat their skin with a waxy secretion. Other frogs have adopted behaviors to conserve water, including becoming nocturnal and resting in a water-conserving position. Some frogs may also rest in large groups with each frog pressed against its neighbors. This reduces the amount of skin exposed to the air or a dry surface, and thus reduces water loss. 62 Woodhouse's toad Bufo woodhousey, if given access to water after confinement in a dry location, sits in the shallows to rehydrate. 64. The male hairy frog Triadobatrachus robustus has dermal papillae projecting from its lower back and thighs, giving it a bristly appearance. These contain blood vessels and are thought to increase the area of the skin available for respiration. Frog barely recognizable against brown decaying leaf litter. Wood frog Lithobates sylvaticus uses disruptive coloration. Some species have bony plates embedded in the skin, a trait that appears to have evolved independently several times. 66. In certain other species, the skin at the top of the head is compacted and the connective tissue of the dermis is co-ossified with the bones of the skull exostosis. Camouflage is a common defensive mechanism in frogs. Certain frogs change color between night and day, as light and moisture stimulate the pigment cells and cause them to expand or contract. 69. Some are even able to control their skin texture. 70. The Pacific tree frog Pseudacris regilla has green and brown morphs, plain or spotted, and changes color depending on the time of year and general background. Color. 71. The wood frog Lithobates sylvaticus uses disruptive coloration including black eye markings, similar to voids between leaves. Bands of the dorsal skin dorsolateral dermal plaque is similar to a leaf midrib, as well as stains, spots, and leg stripes similar to fallen leaf features. Reproductive system. See also sexual selection in amphibians. In the male frog, the two testes are attached to the kidneys and semen passes into the kidneys through fine tubes called afferent ducts. It then travels on through the ureters, which are consequently known as urinogenital ducts. There is no penis, and sperm is ejected from the cloaca directly onto the eggs as the female lays them. The ovaries of the female frog are beside the kidneys, and the eggs pass down a pair of oviducts and through the cloaca to the exterior. When frogs mate, the male climbs on the back of the female and wraps his forelimbs round her body, either behind the front legs or just in front of the hind legs. This position is called amplexus and may be held for several days. 80. The male frog has certain hormone-dependent secondary sexual characteristics. These include the development of special pads on his thumbs in the breeding season to give him a firm hold. 81. The grip of the male frog during amplexus stimulates the female to release eggs, usually wrapped in jelly, as spawn. In many species, the male is smaller and slimmer than the female. Males have vocal cords and make a range of croaks, particularly in the breeding season, and in some species, they also have vocal sacs to amplify the sound. Nervous system. Frogs have a highly developed nervous system that consists of a brain, spinal cord, and nerves. Many parts of frog brains correspond with those of humans. It consists of two olfactory lobes, two cerebral hemispheres, a pineal body, two optic lobes, a cerebellum, and a medulla oblongata. Muscular coordination and posture are controlled by the cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata regulates respiration, digestion, and other automatic functions. The relative size of the cerebrum in frogs is much smaller than it is in humans. Frogs have 10 pairs of cranial nerves, which pass information from the outside directly to the brain, and 10 pairs of spinal nerves, which pass information from the extremities to the brain through the spinal cord. 79. By contrast, all amniotes mammals, birds, and reptiles have 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Close-up of frog's head showing eye, nostril, mouth, and tympanum, sight. The eyes of most frogs are located on either side of the head near the top and project outwards as hemispherical bulges. They provide binocular vision over a field of 100 to the front and a total visual field of almost 360/83. They may be the only part of an otherwise submerged frog to protrude from the water. Each eye has closable upper and lower lids and a nictitating membrane, which provides further protection. Especially when the frog is swimming, 84 members of the aquatic family Pipidae have the eyes located at the top of the head, a position better suited for detecting prey in the water above. 83. The irises come in a range of colors and the pupils in a range of shapes. The common toad Bufo has golden irises and horizontal slit-like pupils. The red-eyed tree frog Agalicnes calidrias has vertical slit pupils. The poison dart frog has dark irises. The fire-bellied toad Bombina spp has triangular pupils, and the tomato frog Discophis spp has circular ones. The irises of the southern toad Onyxiris terrestris are patterned so as to blend in with the surrounding camouflage skin. The distant vision of a frog is better than its near vision. Calling frogs will quickly become silent when they see an intruder or even a moving shadow, but the closer an object is, the less well it is seen. 84. When a frog shoots out its tongue to catch an insect, it is reacting to a small moving object that it cannot see well and must line it up precisely beforehand, because it shuts its eyes as the tongue is extended. Although it was formerly debated, 85 more recent research has shown that frogs can see in color, even in very low light. Hearing surface rendering of the head of the frog Atelopus franciscus with ear parts highlighted. Frogs can hear both in the air and below water. They do not have external ears. The eardrum's tympanic membranes are directly exposed or may be covered by a layer of skin and are visible as a circular area just behind the eye. The size and distance apart of the eardrums is related to the frequency and wavelength at which the frog calls. The middle ear contains semicircular canals which help control balance and orientation. In the inner ear, the auditory hair cells are arranged into areas of the cochlea, the basilar papilla, and the amphibian papillar. The former detects high frequencies and the latter low frequencies. 88. Because the cochlea is short, frogs use electrical tuning to extend their range of audible frequencies and help discriminate different sounds. 89. This arrangement enables detection of the territorial and breeding calls of their conspecifics. In some species that inhabit arid regions, the sound of thunder or heavy rain may arouse them from a dormant state. 88. A frog may be startled by an unexpected noise, but it will not usually take any action until it has located the source of the sound by sight. See also sexual selection in frogs. A male Dendropsophis microcephalus displaying its vocal sac during its call. Duration 1 minute and 35 seconds. 1:35. Advertisement call of male Atelopus franciscus. The call or croak of a frog is unique to its species. Frogs create this sound by passing air through the larynx in the throat. In most calling frogs, the sound is amplified by one or more vocal sacs, membranes of skin under the throat or on the corner of the mouth, that distend during the amplification of the call. Some frog calls are so loud that they can be heard up to a mile 1.6 kilometers away. 90. Additionally, some species have been found to use man-made structures, such as drain pipes, for artificial amplification of their call. The coastal tailed frog Ascophis trui lives in mountain streams in North America and does not vocalize. The main function of calling is for male frogs to attract mates. Males may call individually, or there may be a chorus of sound where numerous males have converged on breeding sites. In many frog species, such as the common tree frog Polypedates leucomistax, females reply to males' calls, which acts to reinforce reproductive activity in a breeding colony. 93 female frogs prefer males that produce sounds of greater intensity and lower frequency, attributes that stand out in a crowd. The rationale for this is thought to be that by demonstrating his prowess, the male shows his fitness to produce superior offspring. A different call is emitted by a male frog or unreceptive female when mounted by another male. This is a distinct chirruping sound and is accompanied by a vibration of the body. 95 tree frogs and some non-aquatic species have a rain call that they make on the basis of humidity cues prior to a shower. 95 many species also have a territorial call that is used to drive away other males. All of these calls are emitted with the mouth of the frog closed. 95 a distress call emitted by some frogs when they are in danger. is produced with the mouth open, resulting in a higher-pitched call. It is typically used when the frog has been grabbed by a predator and may serve to distract or disorient the attackers so that it releases the frog. Duration: 45 seconds, 0:45. Distinctive low jugorum sound of banded bullfrog. Many species of frog have deep calls. The croak of the American bullfrog Ranicatus biana is sometimes written as jugo-rum, 96. The Pacific tree frog Pseudocris regilla produces the onomatopoeic ribbit often heard in films, 97. Other renderings of frog calls into speech include Brecacax coax. The call of the marsh frog Pelophylax ridibundus in The Frogs, an ancient Greek comic drama by Aristophanes, 98. The calls of the concave-eared torrent frog Amalops termotus are unusual in many aspects. The males are notable for their varieties of calls where upward and downward frequency modulations take place. When they communicate, they produce calls that fall in the ultrasound frequency range. The last aspect that makes this species of frog's calls unusual is that nonlinear acoustic phenomena are important components in their acoustic signals. Frogs are generally recognized as exceptional jumpers and, relative to their size, the best jumpers of all vertebrates. 104. The striped rocket frog, Litoria nasuta, can leap over 2 meters, 6 + 1 to feet, a distance that is more than 50 times its body length of 55 millimeters to +1 for in. 105. There are tremendous differences between species in jumping capability. Within a species, jump distance increases with increasing size, but relative jumping distance body length's jump decreases. The Indian skipper frog Euphlyctus cyanophyctus has the ability to leap out of the water from a position floating on the surface. 106. The tiny northern cricket frog Acris crepitans can skitter across the surface of a pond with a series of short rapid jumps. Slow-motion photography shows that the muscles have passive flexibility. They are first stretched while the frog is still in the crouched position, then they are contracted before being stretched again to launch the frog into the air. The forelegs are folded against the chest and the hind legs remain in the extended, streamlined position for the duration of the jump. 53. In some extremely capable jumpers, such as the Cuban tree frog Osteopilus septentrionalis and the northern leopard frog Ranipipians, the peak power exerted during a jump can exceed that which the muscle is theoretically capable of producing. When the muscles contract, the energy is first transferred into the stretched tendon, which is wrapped around the ankle bone. Then the muscles stretch again at the same time as the tendon releases its energy like a catapult to produce a powerful acceleration beyond the limits of muscle-powered acceleration. 108. A similar mechanism has been documented in locusts and grasshoppers. Early hatching of frogoliths can have negative effects on frog jumping performance and overall locomotion. 110. The hind limbs are unable to completely form, which results in them being shorter and much weaker relative to a normal hatching frogolit. 110. Early hatching frogoliths may tend to depend on other forms of locomotion more often, such as swimming and walking. Walking and running, Phrynomantis bifasciatus walking on a level surface. Frogs in the families Bufonidae, Rhinophrynidae, and Microhylidae have short back legs and tend to walk rather than jump. 111. When they try to move rapidly, they speed up the rate of movement of their limbs or resort to an ungainly hopping gait. The Great Plains narrow-mouthed toad Gastrophrine olivacea has been described as having a gait that is a combination of running and short hops that are usually only an inch or two in length. 112. In an experiment, Fowler's toad Bufo fowleri was placed on a treadmill which was turned at varying speeds. By measuring the toad's uptake of oxygen, it was found that hopping was an inefficient use of resources during sustained locomotion, but was a useful strategy during short bursts of high-intensity activity. The red-legged running frog Cassina maculata has short, slim hind limbs unsuited to jumping. It can move fast by using a running gait in which the two hind legs are used alternately. Slow-motion photography shows, unlike a horse that can trot or gallop, the frog's gait remains similar at slow, medium, and fast speeds. 114. This species can also climb trees and shrubs, and does so at night to catch insects. 115. The Indian skipper frog Euphlyctus cynophlyctus has broad feet and can run across the surface of the water for several meters yards. Swimming, common toad swimming, common toad bufo swimming. Frogs that live in or visit water have adaptations that improve their swimming abilities. The hind limbs are heavily muscled and strong. The webbing between the toes of the hind feet increases the area of the foot and helps propel the frog powerfully through the water. Members of the family Pipidae are wholly aquatic and show the most marked specialization. They have inflexible vertebral columns, flattened, streamlined bodies, lateral line systems, and powerful hind limbs with large webbed feet. 116 tadpoles mostly have large tail fins, which provide thrust when the tail is moved from side to side. Burrowing. Some frogs have become adapted for burrowing and a life underground. They tend to have rounded bodies, short limbs, small heads with bulging eyes, and hind feet adapted for excavation. An extreme example of this is the purple frog Triadobatrachus sayadrensis from southern India, which feeds on termites and spends almost its whole life underground. It emerges briefly during the monsoon to mate and breed in temporary pools. It has a tiny head with a pointed snout and a plump, rounded body. Because of this fossorial existence, it was first described in 2003, being new to the scientific community at that time, although previously known to local people. Purple frog Triadobatrachus sayadrensis. The spadefoot toads of North America are also adapted to underground life. The plain spadefoot toad Spebon bifrons is typical and has a flap of keratinized bone attached to one of the metatarsals of the hind feet, which it uses to dig itself backwards into the ground. As it digs, the toad wriggles its hips from side to side to sink into the loose soil. It has a shallow burrow in the summer from which it emerges at night to forage. In winter, it digs much deeper and has been recorded at a depth of 4.5 meters 14 feet 9 in. 119. The tunnel is filled with soil and the toad hibernates in a small chamber at the end. During this time, urea accumulates in its tissues and water is drawn in from the surrounding damp soil by osmosis to supply the toad's needs. 119 spadefoot toads are explosive breeders, all emerging from their burrows at the same time and converging on temporary pools, attracted to one of these by the calling of the first male to find a suitable breeding location. The burrowing frogs of Australia have a rather different lifestyle. The western spotted frog Helioporus albopunctatus digs a burrow beside a river or in the bed of an ephemeral stream and regularly emerges to forage. Mating takes place and eggs are laid in a foam nest inside the burrow. The eggs partially develop there, but do not hatch until they are submerged following heavy rainfall. The tadpoles then swim out into the open water and rapidly complete their development. 121 Madagascan burrowing frogs are less fossorial and mostly bury themselves in leaf litter. One of these, the green burrowing frog Scaphiophrine marmorata, has a flattened head with a short snout and well-developed metatarsal tubercles on its hind feet to help with excavation. It also has greatly enlarged terminal discs on its forefeet that help it to clamber around in bushes. 122. It breeds in temporary pools that form after rains. Climbing. Group of glass frogs. Tree frogs live high in the canopy, where they scramble around on the branches, twigs, and leaves, sometimes never coming down to earth. The true tree frogs belong to the family Hylidae, but members of other frog families have independently adopted an arboreal habit, a case of convergent evolution. These include the glass frogs Centralinidae, the bush frogs Hyperolidae, some of the narrow-mouthed frogs Microhylidae, and the shrub frogs Rhacophoridae. 111 Most tree frogs are under 10 centimeters in length, with long legs and long toes with adhesive pads on the tips. The surface of the toe pads is formed from a closely packed layer of flat-topped, hexagonal epidermal cells separated by grooves into which glands secrete mucus. These toe pads, moistened by the mucus, provide the grip on any wet or dry surface, including glass. The forces involved include boundary friction of the toe pad epidermis on the surface and also surface tension and viscosity. 120 For tree frogs are very acrobatic and can catch insects, while hanging by one toe from a twig or clutching onto the blade of a windswept reed. 125. Some members of the subfamily Philomedusae have opposable toes on their feet. The reticulated leaf frog Philomedusae has a single opposed digit on each forefoot and two opposed digits on its hind feet. This allows it to grasp the stems of bushes as it clambers around in its riverside habitat. Gliding. During the evolutionary history of frogs, several different groups have independently taken to the air. 127. Some frogs in the tropical rainforest are specially adapted for gliding from tree to tree or parachuting to the forest floor. Typical of them is Wallace's flying frog Rhacopherus nigripalmatus from Malaysia and Borneo. It has large feet with the fingertips expanded into flat adhesive discs and the digits fully webbed. Flaps of skin occur on the lateral margins of the limbs and across the tail region. With the digits splayed, the limbs outstretched, and these flaps spread, it can glide considerable distances but is unable to undertake powered flight. 128. It can alter its direction of travel and navigate distances of up to 15 meters.